The Truth About Goblins. Chapter 58. Rush hour in the market. People walked by, streaming down the streets. They passed in front of the window, talking, laughing, glancing at the shop before seeing the sign on the door. And then they continued, their attention directed elsewhere once they realized it was closed, giving it less than a thought once some other novelty had attracted their attention. Bellator watched, envious. From his view by the window, it almost seemed as if nothing had changed. But if any of those strangers outside had stopped to stare at the face in the window, there would be no denying that something had changed. For him, at least. But of course, they were all unaware, blissfully ignorant. He turned from the window at the sound of footsteps. Ophelia stood beside him. "Are you sure we have to go through with this?" "It's for the best." He took her hand in his. "We have to keep them safe." She seemed to agree, albeit reluctantly. "And you're sure I can't go with them?" "It's only temporary," he said. "They'll need someone to come back to, don't you think?" The thought offered little reassurance. She took a seat at a nearby table and sighed. "I'm spent, Jacob. I'm afraid this will finish me." "It won't." He pulled out a chair next to her. "Not you, Ophelia. You were always the strongest of us." This only brought more grief. How did we let this happen? He had no answer. They were quiet until someone lumbered down the stairs behind them. "Got my bag ready," said Kit, setting down a rucksack on another table. "Wilhelm's about finished." Ophelia put on a brave face and rose from her seat. "This is exciting for you, isn't it?" He smiled and nodded. "Another adventure is all. It'll be fun." Bellator caught the look in his eye. He was putting on a brave face, too. "You'll be back before long," he said, leaving his seat to join them. "Where's Okami?" said Ophelia. "You said goodbye to your brother, didn't you?" "Well, I tried." Kit shrugged. "But he's shut himself up in the bedroom. Again. I betcha he's already on another project." "He'll come down when he's ready," said Bellator. "Give him time." Someone else entered the room. "I've done all I can at this point." It was Grim, the baby cradled in his arms. "I'd suggest for her to rest some more, but she's eager to leave." "Understandable." Bellator's gaze fell to the baby. He smiled. "And how's my niece?" Clearly reluctant, Grim sighed and handed her over. "Happy, now that everyone's awake." Bellator's expression softened as he held the child in his arms. "Poppy. She'll have red hair like her mother." "I've no doubt," agreed Grim. His hands were twitching to hold her again. "She'll be just like her." Kit watched the exchange, shaking his head. "All this time we were looking for a girl. You know he told us he was looking for his son," finished Grim. "How typical to assume that." A shadow passed over his eyes. "Twisted, the whole thing." No one dared to disagree, and it wasn't until they heard a voice from the stairs that the silence was broken. "I'm ready." Annie stepped through the curtain and into the tea shop, a bag on her back, a walking stick in hand. "Is there anything else?" Grim eyed her battered leg. "Are you sure you're all right to travel? A few more days of rest would do a great deal of good." "I'm fine." She couldn't look him in the eye. "Thank you for everything." "Truly, it's you I have to thank. Along with Raven and her brother. I owe you more than I could ever repay." The baby cooed in his arms. "We both do." She only nodded, her eyes still on the floor. A long stretch of silence followed. Kit took advantage of the pause and pulled out a small object from his pocket. He held it out to Grim and took a step forward. "What's this?" he said, staring at the stone. "It's the hemonite." Kit placed it in his hand. "I borrowed it, by accident, and now I'm returning it." Grim stared in disbelief as he took the stone. It glowed bright red in his hand. "Well, thank you." He slipped it in his pocket. "It will have to go back with the rest of it, I suppose." "Have you worked it all out with your benefactor?" asked Bellator. "There's nothing else to do, is there?" "All taken care of," he said, "and for only a portion of the gold in exchange." "A small mercy," said Ophelia. "It should make leaving that much easier." He nodded in agreement. "High time I washed my hands of this business. I'll feel much more at ease when Poppy and I are above ground." "Speaking of which," said Bellator, "I don't think we should wait much longer." He turned to Annie and Kit. "You're both ready?" They looked to one another, saying nothing. It was clear that they were. "Time to shove off," said Kit. "Let's go then." He looked to Ophelia. "It's time to say goodbye." She stepped forward and embraced both of them, on the verge of tears. "You two have to take care of each other, you hear me? Just as soon as it's safe, turn around and come back to me." She released them and cupped Kit's face in her hands. "Write me every day, young man, every day." "Mother!" He rolled his eyes. "There's no way we can send one every day. We'll be busy traveling, sightseeing, having fun." She turned to Annie. "Make sure he does send them, won't you? Let me know you're both all right." "I will," she promised. "We'll write as often as we can." She gave in to temptation and hugged them again. "Are you sure they can't stay?" Bellator was firm. "As long as he's at large, it's safest for them to leave the market. He won't be able to find them so long as they keep moving." "But what about the black stone?" said Kit. "What if he—" His words trailed off into silence as he caught the look of terror on his mother's face. "If he had any desire to use it, we would have known by now," said Grim. "This is just to be cautious, to keep you two out of reach." "It's better to play it safe than to speculate," added Bellator. "Now then, if there's nothing else you have to do, I think it's time to leave. I'll show you to the gate while—" "Can't I come along?" said Ophelia, grabbing his arm. "Just to see them off?" "We'll be fine, Mother." Kit stepped forward and gave her a peck on the cheek. "We'll see each other real soon." Whether or not she believed him, she took the hint and stepped aside. "All right, little fox, but please be careful." "I'll make sure he is," said Annie. With that, Bellator gestured to the door. The other two followed his movement and turned their backs on the tea shop. Ophelia watched, silent. Grim came and stood beside her. No one said anything more. "Wait!" Footsteps on the stairs. "Kit! Annie!" Cam burst through the curtain, a massive backpack slung across his shoulders. "I'm coming too!" Ophelia spun on her heel. "Oh, Kami! I want to go with them!" He tried to push past her, but she grabbed his bag and yanked him back. "What are you thinking, Okami? You are not gallivanting off on me!" The others were stunned. "What the heck are you trying to pull?" exclaimed Kit. "You can't come with us." "Why not?" he wailed. "Why can't I come?" "Because I need you here, that's why." Ophelia turned him around. "You're not just going to leave me on my own, are you? How am I supposed to run this shop?" But Mom, I gotta go with them. He tugged at her arm, bringing her down to his level. Please, Mom, you gotta let me go too. She frowned. What's gotten into you? I don't understand. He looked to Annie and his brother. Biting his lip, he leaned in close and whispered something in her ear. Only Ophelia could hear him, and when he backed away, her eyes went wide. Oh, Kami, you can't be... That's not... Annie stepped forward. He can come. Really? Exclaimed the boys. She nodded. We'll look after him, as long as he has your permission. Ophelia looked from face to face. But he's only a boy, he can't... Mom? Cam looked up, pleading with his eyes. Can I, please? She couldn't manage words, but she wasn't shaking her head either. Kit stared at her. You're not actually gonna let him come, are you? If he changes his mind, we'll send him right back, said Annie. And we'll make sure he gets home safe. It looked as though she would faint. Feeling weak, she pulled out a chair and took a seat. Do you really want this, Okami? Do you really want to leave me? He leaned over and hugged her. I love you, Mom. A whole lot. It was another long moment before he pulled himself away. I'll write letters, even if Kit doesn't wanna. She took his hand in hers, watching him slip away. Be good for me, Okami. Be good and kind. She turned to Kit. Look after him. He sighed. Yeah, for sure, Mother. We'll get him back in one piece. Bellator and Grim exchanged awkward glances, but neither of them said anything until Cam had taken his place between the other two. Well, Bellator opened the door. The more the merrier, I guess. But let's not make this any longer than it has to be, all right? We should be gone by now. They filed through the doorway, each casting a final glance towards Ophelia. She held back the tears, refusing to let her smile fade until all three were on the street and well out of sight. But even when the tea shop had disappeared behind them, Kit had to look back. Will she be okay? I asked Dr. Stoker to keep an eye on her, said Bellator, leading them through the crowd. He and I will keep in touch. Where are you going? Said Annie. I thought you would stay to clean up the Arbiter's mess. I doubt I'll ever sit behind that desk again, he said. Just as I suspected, they're denying any involvement with the earthquakes whatsoever. It's my word against theirs, and unfortunately, he sighed, they outnumber us. They'll have someone else to take my place by now. She turned to him, lifting her gaze until she was staring at his face. He was back in the suit, the one he had been wearing when they had first met, but he couldn't have looked more different. His hair was whiter now, not altogether noticeable, but his face was another story. Scarred, marked with a lingering grief that had worked its way past the surface and into his features. He was aged, not by days but years. He was not the same man she had met in the Arbiter's Tower. He was looking at her too. Are you sure you're all right? She nodded and looked away. Tired. She closed her eyes. Just tired. She was changed as well, not only by what she had seen through her own eyes, but through the crystal hidden under her clothes. She kept it covered now, away from her skin, but she felt its weight on the cord around her neck. Grim's memories with her own. When she looked up at Bellator, she saw more than a man. She saw a brother. Without thinking, she took his hand. He looked down, surprised, but he turned his gaze ahead the very next second. You know, when I sent you off to your adopted parents, I always pictured the day you'd come back. A smile tugged at the edge of his lips. I looked forward to giving you a tour of this place, my market. I comforted myself with the thought of your bright eyes, taking it all in. I was looking forward to it. Another sigh. I'm sorry it happened the way it did. It's not your fault. She gave his hand a squeeze. I know you didn't mean for this to happen. No, of course not. He stopped, the gate looming ahead of them. Well, here it is. This is where we say goodbye. The three stood before him, eager faces mixed with a sort of regret. Saying goodbye was never easy. Before we head our separate ways, is there anything else you'd like me to do? Any questions you have for me? Annie shoved a hand into her pocket. Just one, if you don't mind. She pulled out a small piece of paper and handed it to him. Could you deliver a message for me? He looked at the address and raised an eyebrow. For your parents? Could you tell them what happened here? There wasn't any anger to her voice, no bitterness or hostility. I don't want them to have to read it in a letter, and I don't want them to hear about it from anyone except you. She laid her hand on his arm. Tell them I'm not mad. Not anymore. She went quiet. Tell my parents I forgive them. With a nod of understanding, he slipped the note inside his jacket. I will. Is that the last of it? Kit and Annie exchanged glances. They didn't have to say a word. It's all been arranged, he said, just like you asked. He turned away. Actually, I would encourage you to attend. You won't get another chance. They both nodded. We will, said Kit. Bellator looked up from the ground, his gaze falling across each face. A small smile, and he held out a hand. Goodbye. Kit was the first. Later, Bellator. Cam was next, taking his hand as he stared at the ground. Bye. Goodbye, Okami. Look after your brother. And then he turned to Annie. She pushed his hand aside and embraced him. He stood still at first, unsure, but he gave in a moment later and wrapped his arms around her. She could hear his heart beating through his chest. Don't be afraid, Jacob. He stared at her as she pulled away, but he couldn't come up with any answer. Kit pulled her forward. Come on, before he gets all soppy on us. He managed to laugh. He is human, you know. Cam was right behind them. Are we actually leaving this time? She looked over her shoulder, stealing a last glance at Bellator before the crowd swept him out of sight. And then it hit her. They were leaving the Goblin Market. Kit's crystal glowed under his shirt. Aw, man, not you too. He continued to pull her towards the gate. Come on, it'll be fun. Adventure, excitement, new things to see, and... She pulled him close and held him tight. He didn't realize what was happening until her face was buried in his shoulder. I miss her too. His voice caught in his throat. Yeah. He pulled her closer. A lot. But a moment later and it was over. Without anything more, they continued on their way. No one spoke for the longest time, not until they were right at the foot of the gate. One step away from entering the tunnel, Annie slowed to a stop. Okay, she said, taking a deep breath. For real this time. Are we all set? Ready, said Kit. Ready, said Cam. All right. She adjusted the straps on her backpack, her walking stick in hand. Next stop, the world. After we say goodbye to her, added Kit. Yeah. She looked over her shoulder and smiled. It was a sad smile. One last goodbye. Hey, hi, I'm your narrator, Miranda Eastwood, also the author of The Truth About Goblins. If you liked this chapter, remember to add, follow, or subscribe to this channel so you can hear the next one. And if you didn't like this chapter, oh well, I can't really do anything about that. In any case, I just thought I'd let you know about my Patreon. You can check it out if you'd like to throw some support my way. It would mean a lot to me. Not to mention there's loads of extra exclusive content that I only post on Patreon. While I'm at it, I'll mention that The Truth About Goblins is now available as a complete audiobook, and you can get it wherever you get your audiobooks. Thanks for listening.